Thank you, Heather. Um, First off, I want to thank the Russell Kirk Center and Mr. McLellan himself for establishing this award. It really means so much to me, and I'm so honored to be a part of this inaugural cohort to receive this prize. But I want to especially thank all of you here today, because it's really for your support for the Kirk Center and for this prize that I have the support network and the opportunities to be able to be up here and stand for free speech. So thank you. I started college at Stanford in the fall of 2021, and I can still distinctly remember the way my aunt looked at me when I told her I'd gotten into Stanford. I expected some sort of excitement. I was very excited. Stanford was my dream school. But instead, what I got from my aunt was a look of disdain. And I didn't understand it then, but it's much more clear to me now. Our universities, which should garner the highest respect, have instead become some of the most despised institutions in our country. My aunt's sentiment is not unique. It is what I'm sure many of you and so many other Americans feel about the current state of our top universities. I witnessed it firsthand at Stanford. The reason we have awards like the McLellan Fellowship in the first place is because of the assaults on free speech that we see taking place at schools just like Stanford. Just in my time, I watched as the university released the Harmful Language Initiative, which, as you may remember, banned words like American and brave. I called for the university to fire Stanford Law School's Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion when she encouraged and condoned the student protesters shouting down federal judge Kyle Duncan from speaking on campus. And I watched as the double standards of the university unfolded during the pro-Palestine protests on campus. But COVID was where the worst of the assaults on free speech came out of Stanford. Over the past several years, Stanford has become inextricably intertwined with censorship. It has censored not only its own faculty and its students, but it has censored what the average American citizen can hear, can read, and can say. It was Stanford that collaborated with the government and big tech to censor Americans on social media platforms through the Stanford Internet Observatory. And it was Stanford that censured and suspended its own leading faculty members for holding contrarian views. But through those difficult times, Stanford also produced some of the strongest advocates for free speech. The very members who were censored at Stanford stood for what they believed in and stood for free speech. As their positions have gradually become vindicated, Stanford's failures only serve as an example for the necessity of free speech and academic freedom. I'm incredibly grateful to have some of those people as my mentors. They're some of the most courageous leaders and some of the strongest advocates for free speech that I know. And one of them, as Heather mentioned, was my advisor and professor, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, or soon to be NIH director, Dr. Bhattacharya. Can we just have one more round of applause for him? Dr. Bhattacharya nominated me for this award, and I'm just so grateful for him and all that he's done on campus. And another person, Dr. Scott Atlas at Stanford, who I'll be with in Zurich just next week for an international conference for young leaders on defending freedom. Both Dr. Bhattacharya and Dr. Atlas have demonstrated what standing up for free speech truly looks like. But the issue of free speech and academic freedom is nothing new. In fact, as Heather said, Stanford has a long and turbulent history with it. From the very beginning of Stanford's history, the firing of this young professor nearly derailed the university with so much controversy, and it led to the beginning of faculty tenure in the United States. And again at Stanford, the expulsion of a PhD student who documented the forced abortions and sterilizations in China, and the firing of the first tenured faculty member during the Vietnam War protests have repeatedly tested the university's relationship with free speech and academic freedom. The battle to preserve these rights must be won again and again and again. And I'm honored to be receiving the McLellan Award to work on just that. I will be spending this next year writing about what I witnessed at Stanford and how we can restore free speech in our institutions. We live in a rapidly changing world, and a world that is on the verge of changing more rapidly than ever before. The pandemic showed us how important it is to protect the most basic principles of free speech. Our country and our institutions made many mistakes this time around, but whatever crisis comes next might not be as forgiving. Our academic institutions must be the safeguards of free speech not the opposite. Maybe then will my aunt, maybe yourself, and so many other Americans feel differently about these schools. Thank you so much.